The first rays of light crept slowly over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the still morning. The soft chirp of birds outside the window was the only sound breaking the quiet as the world began to wake. Inside the Diesel residence in Calabasas, California, the house stood as perfect and polished as any magazine cover, its marble countertops gleaming under the soft lighting, the stainless steel appliances untouched, pristine. The house looked beautiful but empty, like a stage set waiting for action. It was a home, yes, but it wasn't full of the chaos that usually marked family life. Vin Diesel stirred from his sleep before the sun had fully risen. His body was already awake, moving through the familiar steps of his morning routine. The alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., but Vin didn't need it. He had long since trained himself to wake up without it. It was a part of his discipline, his unwavering commitment to structure. He rose from the bed, his movements practiced and quiet, so as not to disturb Rachel, who still slept beside him. In the dark, he slipped into his sneakers and pulled on his workout gear. The routine was the same every day. Up before dawn, a workout to get the blood pumping, a protein shake to fuel him for the day. By 7 a.m., he was ready to face whatever the world would throw his way. There was no room for weakness in this world, not in his life. He had been trained for years to face danger head-on, from car chases to fight scenes, from diving off bridges to walking through fire. Nothing, he believed, could shake him. His career had been built on that unshakable confidence, that ability to stare fear in the face and keep moving forward. But as Vin stepped into the kitchen that morning, he couldn't shake the strange feeling in his chest. The house was still, too still, and the usual hum of the world outside seemed distant, muted. Rachel was already up, standing in the kitchen with her coffee, her white scrubs a stark contrast to the soft morning light. She wasn't smiling. Her face was set, her eyes focused on the phone in her hand as she scrolled through the hospital schedule. She wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor, having just returned from her overnight shift at Cedars-Sinai. Vin watched her for a moment, his gaze lingering as she stood there, a slight frown on her face. She hadn't always been like this, so distant, so consumed by her work. But over the years, her role as a trauma nurse had taken more of her time. It was as if she lived in another world, one where life and death were everyday occurrences, and emotions had no place. He had always admired her strength, her resilience. But lately, he couldn't help but feel the growing distance between them, the silence that had settled into their relationship like a thick fog. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and for a second, it felt like the world had stopped. But then it was gone, replaced by the practicality of their morning exchange. "Did Ava eat?" Rachel asked, her voice a soft blend of concern and routine. Ava, their 6-year-old daughter, had always been a quiet child, reserved, introspective. She didn't share much, but when she did, it was always profound. Vin nodded, taking a sip of his protein shake. She had some toast. Apple slices, too. He hadn't seen much of her that morning. It was like that some days, when the weight of his own life and the demands of his career kept him from truly connecting with her. Rachel sighed, her eyes flickering with a touch of frustration. "She didn't speak to me this morning again. Not a word." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Vin felt a pang of guilt. Ava's quietness had been something he'd grown used to, but he knew Rachel worried. The silence between them seemed to stretch longer and longer each day, and Rachel's eyes, those sharp, compassionate eyes, seemed to see through him, to see the distance he had created in his own life. "She's quiet," Vin replied, his tone even. "She's always been quiet." But Rachel didn't seem convinced. She looked like she wanted to say more, to express the concern she had, but she bit her lip and said nothing. She grabbed her bag from the counter, her movements quick and efficient, as if she had already moved on from the conversation. Her life as a nurse didn't leave room for indecision or hesitation. Every day was a battle, a race against time. With a light kiss on Ava's forehead, so quick it barely registered, she was gone, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as she left for the hospital. Vin stood there for a moment, alone in the kitchen, the silence settling back around him. The weight of the morning felt heavier now, the tension in the air thicker. He stood in place, his mind drifting for just a moment, before he turned to find Ava. She was on the couch, her small figure hunched over as she drew quietly in her faded Elsa t-shirt. Her pajama pants were worn, frayed at the edges, but there was a certain charm to the simplicity of it. In that moment, Vin saw her in a way he hadn't in a long time. A quiet little soul sitting in the heart of his home, lost in her own world of drawings and imagination. He wondered, for just a fleeting moment, if this was what it had all been about. The work, the fame, the relentless pursuit of success. Had he forgotten what truly mattered? But Ava didn't look up as he approached. She never did. The little girl, who had always been so quiet, was consumed by her own thoughts, her own world, her crayons pressed firmly into the paper. There was something about her that moved him, something that pulled at his heartstrings, but also made him feel helpless. He didn't know how to connect with her anymore. The distance that had formed between them over the years was growing wider with every passing day. A sense of unease lingered in the pit of his stomach, a feeling he couldn't shake. He had faced stunts that should have killed him, driven cars off cliffs, jumped from helicopters, and fought like a warrior. But none of that had prepared him for this. The quiet, the distance, the growing realization that he might have lost touch with the most important part of his life. As he stood there, watching Ava lost in her drawing, the house around him seemed to grow colder. And then, just as quickly as the thought had come, a sense of dread washed over him. What had he missed? Where had things gone wrong? The answer was simple. He had forgotten how to truly be present. This marks the beginning of a shift for Vin Diesel. The routines and battles of his career had always been so clear-cut: action, risk, and reward. But now, as he looked at his daughter, a new challenge began to take shape. This challenge would test him in ways he never expected. What would happen when life, in all its unpredictable beauty, brought him face to face with something that had nothing to do with? Vin Diesel had never been one to question the life he had built. There was always a sense of certainty in the path he walked. Every challenge he faced, every stunt he performed, had been meticulously planned. His success had been built on that: precision, timing, control. But the quiet moments, like the one he was experiencing now, seemed to offer no such assurances. There was no script, no director yelling action, and certainly no explosion to signal a new challenge. It was just him, standing in his own kitchen, unsure of what to do next. The quiet in the house grew more pronounced with each passing second. Ava's soft scribbling on the paper was the only sound that broke the silence, and Vin stood there, uncertain. He had always prided himself on being a strong presence in his home. He was the protector, the provider, the leader. But this morning, for the first time in a long time, he felt like an outsider in his own life. His own daughter was a mystery to him. It wasn't that he didn't love her. Of course, he did. But somewhere along the way, between the constant filming, the traveling, the red carpet events, he had missed the small moments, the moments that mattered. He had been so consumed with building a career, a legacy, that he hadn't realized how much time had slipped through his fingers. He thought back to when Ava was just a toddler, when she would giggle and run to him, her tiny arms outstretched, asking him to pick her up and hold her close. Those days seemed so far away now, like a distant dream. Now she was 6, quiet and withdrawn, her world filled with crayons and drawings, while he stood at the periphery, unsure how to bridge the gap. Vin took a deep breath and walked over to the couch where Ava sat. He knelt down beside her, trying to get a better look at the picture she was drawing. It was a scene, a landscape with a sky full of swirling clouds and a small figure standing in the center, looking up. Ava's drawings had always been like this, open-ended, filled with possibility. But this one felt different. There was something about the way she'd drawn the figure, the way it seemed so small, standing alone in a vast, open space. It was as though she was telling a story with a picture, a story that Vin didn't fully understand. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly, his voice quiet and careful, as if he were walking on thin ice. Ava didn't look up at him, not at first. She kept her eyes focused on the paper, her little fingers moving with precision as she shaded in the clouds. But then, slowly, she looked up at him, her eyes wide, her gaze unreadable. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she were uncertain of her own words. Vin felt a pang in his chest at the sound of her voice. There was a distance in her tone, a hesitance that wasn't there before. She used to run to him when he came home, excited to show him her latest drawing or tell him about her day. But now she was more reserved, more quiet. He couldn't figure out why. Was it his fault? Had he somehow pushed her away without realizing it? "I like your drawing," he said, trying to break the silence, trying to make a connection, however small. "What's the story behind it?" Ava's eyes flickered with a brief moment of recognition, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to study him for a long time, as if she were measuring him, trying to decide if he was someone worth talking to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's me," she said, her small finger pointing to the little figure in the drawing. "I'm lost." The word struck Vin harder than he could have anticipated. She was lost. Was that how she felt? It hit him like a punch to the stomach. His daughter, his little girl, was feeling lost, and he hadn't even noticed. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, in his own schedule, that he hadn't realized that Ava was struggling. "Lost?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly, the weight of the word sinking in. "Lost how?" Ava's gaze dropped back to the paper. "I don't know. I just feel like I don't fit in. I don't know where I'm supposed to be." Vin swallowed hard, fighting the lump that had formed in his throat. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't prepared for this conversation, and yet it seemed like the only conversation that mattered now. He had faced challenges in his career that had pushed him to the edge, but none of them had been as raw, as personal as this. His own daughter, his flesh and blood, was telling him that she felt lost, that she didn't know where she belonged, and he had no idea how to help her. "Ava," he began, his voice soft and searching. "You don't have to feel lost. You're not alone. You have me. You have Mommy. We're here for you." She didn't look up at him this time. She didn't respond. She just kept drawing, the tip of her crayon pressing harder into the paper, as if she were trying to make her own mark on the world in a way that words couldn't express. Vin sat there for a long time, watching her, trying to figure out what to do. How could he help her? How could he make her feel seen, feel heard, when he had been so absent from her world? He had spent his life facing dangers on movie sets, risking his life in ways that should have been impossible. But this was a challenge unlike any he had ever faced before. It wasn't about action. It wasn't about strength or stunts or being the toughest guy in the room. It was about something deeper, something he had never fully understood until now. As the minutes passed, the weight of the moment seemed to grow heavier, and Vin felt an overwhelming sense of regret. He hadn't been there for her. He hadn't been the father she needed him to be. He had been so consumed with his own career, his own success, that he hadn't noticed how much she had changed. And now she was telling him that she felt lost, and all he could do was sit there silently. The room was quiet once again, and Vin's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. There had to be a way to fix this, a way to make things right. But for the first time, he didn't have an answer. As the morning stretched on, and the house remained still, Vin made a promise to himself. He wasn't going to let his daughter feel lost anymore. He wasn't going to let this quiet distance grow between them any longer. Something had to change. Something inside of him had to shift. Because if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that family wasn't something you could build with stunts or success. Family was built with presence, with love, with understanding. And for the first time in a long while, Vin realized that he was going to have to find a way to truly be present, not just for his career, but for his family, for Ava, the one person who needed him more than anyone else in the world. The next few days felt like a blur to Vin, a strange series of moments that didn't quite fit into the life he had meticulously constructed for himself. Each day, he continued his routine: workouts, studio meetings, phone calls, but it was as if the world around him was happening in slow motion. The conversations at the office, the business deals, the people who looked up to him, they all seemed so distant, so disconnected from the feeling of unease that had taken root in his chest. His thoughts kept drifting back to Ava, to her quiet eyes, her withdrawn demeanor. The way she had looked at him that morning, as if he were a stranger, unsure of where she fit in this big, chaotic world. The way she had drawn herself as a tiny figure, standing alone in a vast space. It haunted him. It gnawed at him in a way he couldn't shake. Rachel, too, seemed distant. She was always busy with her work at the hospital, and they barely spoke when they did cross paths at home. It wasn't that they were fighting. It was just that they were both so consumed by their own lives. Rachel's focus had always been on her patients, on saving lives, while Vin had focused on his career, on being the best at what he did. But now, both of them seemed to be running on autopilot, living side by side, but not really connecting. Vin had been raised in a world that didn't prioritize emotions. In the Bronx, where he grew up, feelings were a luxury, and vulnerability was seen as weakness. His parents had worked hard to provide for him and his siblings, but there hadn't been much room for softness. There was a kind of unspoken rule in the neighborhood. You kept your head down, worked hard, and never let anyone see you falter. It was a mindset he had carried with him into adulthood, a mindset that had served him well in the world of Hollywood, where strength and control were paramount. But now, standing in his own home, he realized that strength and control weren't enough. He couldn't solve this with force or willpower. This wasn't a stunt he could pull off or a scene he could act his way through. This was real life. And in real life, there were no retakes. The turning point came late one evening, after Rachel had left for another night shift at the hospital. Vin was sitting in the living room, the house quiet and still. He had planned to go over some script notes, but the papers sat untouched in front of him. Instead, his mind kept returning to Ava, to the image of her drawing, to the words she had spoken. "I'm lost." She hadn't said much else, but that one line had been enough to unravel him. How had he let it get this far? How had he let her feel that way? He stood up abruptly, his movements restless. The silence in the house was deafening, and it felt like the walls were closing in around him. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and then stood by the window, staring out into the night. The lights of Calabasas twinkled in the distance, but it all seemed so far away. He couldn't focus on anything except the feeling of guilt that clung to him like a heavy cloak. Ava hadn't spoken much since their conversation that morning. She had gone about her day as she always did, withdrawn, lost in her own world. Vin knew she wasn't the type to ask for help directly, but he also knew that if he didn't do something soon, this distance between them would only grow. He couldn't stand the thought of his little girl feeling like she didn't belong in her own family. That night, after Rachel returned home, he made a decision. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way he knew how to begin mending the gap that had formed. He was going to take Ava out for a special day, just the two of them. No distractions, no work, no phone calls, just father and daughter, reconnecting, trying to find the pieces of their relationship that had gotten lost along the way. The next morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Vin woke up early. He wanted to get everything right. He planned a simple trip to the beach, a place where he could spend time with Ava, away from the chaos of the city. He was going to give her his full attention, something he hadn't done in far too long. Ava's eyes were still sleepy when he woke her up, but when he told her they were going to the beach, her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in months. She didn't say much, but her smile was enough. It was a small spark, a flicker of the girl he had once known. They packed a simple lunch, some snacks, and drove out to the coast. As they arrived, the cool sea breeze washed over them, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the air. Ava stood still for a moment, taking it all in, before she slowly stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the soft sand. Vin watched her for a moment, trying to read her, trying to understand her in a way he hadn't before. They spent the next few hours walking along the shore, collecting seashells and playing in the sand. Vin didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just wanted to be there with her, to show her that she wasn't alone. As they sat down on a large rock by the water's edge, Ava turned to him with a question that surprised him. "Daddy, why don't you talk to me sometimes?" Her voice was soft, but it hit him like a wave crashing against the rocks. Vin's heart ached at the question. He had been so focused on everything else, his career, his fame, his responsibilities, that he hadn't noticed how his silence had affected her. He hadn't realized how his absence in the moments that mattered most had made her feel even more isolated. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so caught up in my own life, in everything I thought I needed to do, that I forgot to be here with you, to really be here. And that's on me." Ava looked at him, her young eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and understanding. She didn't say anything for a long time, but eventually she reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She wasn't lost anymore. Not as long as he was there, trying, every day, to be the father she needed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Vin realized that he couldn't fix everything in a single day. But today had been a start. It had been the first step in reclaiming the bond he had nearly lost with his daughter. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally on the right path. There were no shortcuts to building a meaningful relationship, no stunts or special effects that could make up for the time lost. It was about presence, patience, and love. And as the waves crashed around them, Vin knew that this was the most important mission he would ever undertake. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt unfamiliar yet comforting to Vin. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time in years, he was seeing the world around him with a new clarity. Each morning, instead of rushing through his routine, he found himself savoring the small moments, the scent of his coffee brewing, the warmth of the sunlight pouring through the windows, the soft hum of Ava's laughter as she played with her toys. These were the moments that had once passed him by, unnoticed, and now they felt like treasures. Ava, too, seemed to have changed. She wasn't the same distant little girl she had been just a week ago. There was still a quietness to her, but it was no longer the kind of silence that spoke of loneliness. It was a silence that spoke of contentment, of a child who was beginning to feel safe again in her own home, in her own skin. Vin couldn't help but notice how her eyes had softened, how her posture had relaxed. She had stopped drawing those images of herself as a tiny figure lost in a vast world. Instead, she began drawing scenes of family, of them together, smiling, laughing. The shift was subtle, but it was there, and it gave Vin hope. The real change came one Saturday afternoon when Rachel suggested they take a family trip to a nearby park. Vin wasn't sure what to expect. It wasn't that he didn't want to spend time with his wife and daughter. It was just that he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap that had formed between him and Rachel. They had been living parallel lives for so long, functioning as roommates more than as partners. But as he watched Rachel pack a picnic basket and prepare for the day, he realized that this was as much a chance for them to reconnect as it was for Ava. When they arrived at the park, the weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze rustling the trees. It felt like the kind of day you could breathe in, the kind of day that reminded you of what really mattered. As Vin watched Ava run ahead, her laughter ringing through the air, he felt something shift inside of him. He had been so wrapped up in his own world for so long that he had forgotten how to enjoy the simplicity of these moments. It wasn't about the movies, the fame, or the accolades. It was about the people who mattered most: his wife, his daughter. For a while, the three of them walked together, talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the ease of each other's company. Vin couldn't help but notice how much easier it was to talk to Rachel when they weren't bogged down by the weight of their responsibilities. There were no phone calls to answer, no meetings to attend, no cameras following them around. It was just them, in this little pocket of time, and it felt like a rare gift. But then, something unexpected happened. As they sat down on a patch of grass to enjoy their picnic, Rachel turned to him with a look of concern on her face. "Vin, we need to talk." His heart sank. He had known this conversation was coming. The truth was, he had been avoiding it. He had hoped that by focusing on Ava, he could avoid the difficult conversations he and Rachel needed to have about their own relationship. But now, sitting there in the quiet of the park, he knew there was no escaping it. "I know," he said, his voice tight. "I've been thinking the same thing." Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't want to make this harder than it has to be, but we can't keep going like this. I can see you're trying, Vin. I really can. But we've been drifting apart for so long, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend that everything is okay." Vin's chest tightened at her words. He had known, deep down, that things weren't okay between them. But hearing her say it out loud made it real, made it undeniable. He had been so focused on fixing his relationship with Ava, trying to make up for lost time with her, that he had ignored the growing distance between him and Rachel. And now it felt like that distance was insurmountable. "I know I've been distant," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so focused on everything else that I lost sight of what matters most. I'm sorry, Rachel. I don't want to lose you." Rachel's expression softened, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. "I know you don't, Vin, but I need to know that we can rebuild this. I need to know that we can be a family again, not just for Ava's sake, but for ours too." The words hit him like a wave, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He had spent so much of his life building a career, chasing success, that he hadn't realized how much he had taken Rachel for granted. She had always been there, always by his side, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped showing her the love and appreciation she deserved. And now it felt like it might be too late to fix it. But then, as he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in what felt like forever, he realized that it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. Not if they both wanted it. Not if they both were willing to put in the work. "I don't want to lose you either," he said, his voice firmer now. "And I'm not giving up on us. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to fight for us, Rachel. For you, for me, for Ava. We've been through a lot together, and I believe we can make it through this too." Rachel studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Finally, she nodded, her eyes softening. "I want that too, Vin. But we have to be honest with each other, and we have to be willing to make changes. No more pretending everything's fine when it's not. We have to work through this together." Vin nodded in agreement. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. They had a lot of work to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the same page. For the first time, he felt like they had a real chance to rebuild what had been broken. As the afternoon wore on, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Vin couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the connection he was beginning to rebuild with Rachel, or the moments of joy he was sharing with Ava. It was the realization that even in the face of adversity, there was always a chance to start over, to make things right. That evening, as they drove home from the park, Ava fell asleep in the backseat, her head resting against the window. Vin looked at Rachel, a silent understanding passing between them. They had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the journey, because he knew that, together, they could face whatever came their way. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The weeks following that conversation in the park unfolded slowly, as though time itself was giving them the space they needed to heal. The cracks that had formed in their relationship between Vin and Rachel were still there, visible beneath the surface. But now they were acknowledging them, facing them together. It wasn't an easy journey, and it certainly wasn't something that could be fixed with a few good conversations or moments of clarity. But it was a start, a delicate but necessary beginning. Vin found himself more present at home, more attuned to the quiet moments he once ignored. He spent less time glued to his phone or distracted by the endless stream of meetings, and more time simply being there for Ava and Rachel. It was a humbling experience, one that required him to let go of some of his old habits, to give up the comfort of always being in control. He had spent so much of his life pushing forward, achieving one goal after another, without taking a moment to really appreciate what he already had. But now, there was no room for that anymore. There was no room for distractions or pretending. If he wanted his family to thrive, he had to start by investing in them, not just as a father or a husband, but as a human being, flawed, vulnerable, and deeply in need of connection. Ava, for her part, was blossoming in ways Vin couldn't have predicted. She wasn't the same quiet, withdrawn little girl she had been just a few weeks ago. There was still an air of introspection about her, but it was clear that she was starting to find her voice again. She had always been an observer, an artist at heart, drawing the world in intricate little sketches that captured her emotions better than words ever could. But recently, Vin had noticed a change. She started talking more, asking questions, engaging with him and Rachel in ways she hadn't before. It was as if the shell she had been hiding in had begun to crack, revealing a girl who was still full of wonder, full of possibility. One evening after dinner, Ava came up to Vin, holding a piece of paper in her hand. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Vin took the paper from her and smiled. It was a drawing of their family, a simple but beautiful rendition of the three of them standing together in front of a house, Ava in the middle with Rachel on one side, and Vin on the other. It wasn't just a picture, it was a story. And in that moment, Vin understood something that had been missing for so long. Ava had always communicated through her art, and in this drawing, she had given them the greatest gift she could, a reminder of their unity, a visual symbol of their family's strength. "You're amazing," he said softly, pulling her into a hug. He kissed her forehead, feeling the warmth of her small body against his. It was a reminder of everything that mattered, the simple, beautiful moments that he had once overlooked. But even with all the progress they had made, there was still a sense of unease in the background. As much as Vin was trying to be there for Ava and Rachel, there were still things left unsaid between him and Rachel. He could feel it. The quiet tension, the weight of unspoken words. It wasn't a matter of anger or resentment. It was just that they had both changed, in different ways, and the gap between them, though smaller now, was still there. Rachel had always been the strong, steady presence in their marriage. She was the rock. But lately, Vin could sense a vulnerability in her that he hadn't noticed before. She had always been the one to pick up the slack when he wasn't around, to keep everything running smoothly. But now, it seemed like she was starting to question whether she could continue shouldering so much alone. They were both exhausted, both struggling to balance their individual responsibilities with the needs of their family. One night, as they sat on the couch together after Ava had gone to bed, Rachel finally turned to him, her expression serious. "Vin," she began, her voice soft but clear, "we need to talk." Vin felt a lump form in his throat. He knew this conversation had been coming, but hearing it out loud still made his chest tighten. "About what?" "About us," she said quietly, her eyes searching his face for something. "I know you're trying. I see it, and I appreciate it. But I need to know if we're really going to do this, if we're really going to make this work." Vin swallowed hard, his mind racing. He hadn't wanted to face the reality that their relationship was still fragile, but he couldn't deny it. There were too many things they hadn't resolved, too many layers of pain and misunderstanding that hadn't been fully addressed. The road to healing wasn't linear, and as much as he wanted to believe that everything could be fixed with love and effort, he knew there were no shortcuts. "I want to make it work, Rachel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I do, but I don't know how to fix everything. I don't know if I have all the answers. I spent so much of my life thinking I could fix everything. But this isn't something I can just fix with a speech or a grand gesture. I want to be the partner you need. I want to be the father Ava deserves. But I don't have all the answers yet. I'm still learning." Rachel looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening. "I know, Vin. I know you're still figuring it out. I am too, but that's okay. We don't have to have everything figured out today, but we have to keep working at it, both of us, together." For the first time in a long time, Vin felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that came from solving everything in one conversation. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was the kind of relief that came from honesty, from knowing that they were both on the same page. They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to keep trying. And that was enough for now. Over the next few weeks, they took small steps, adjusting their schedules, carving out more time for each other, making room for the difficult conversations. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And as the days went by, Vin found himself more and more at peace with the process, knowing that the path to healing wasn't about perfection. It was about effort and understanding, and the willingness to keep showing up, even when things were tough. Ava continued to thrive in the warmth of their renewed connection. She was still quiet at times, still lost in her drawings, but now there was an openness in her that hadn't been there before. She was no longer hiding behind the walls she had built, and in her own way, she was learning how to trust again, how to open her heart to the love that was surrounding her. For Vin, every little moment, every shared laugh, every peaceful silence, every time he saw Rachel smile, felt like a victory. It was a reminder that family wasn't about perfection. It was about love and the courage to face the hard times together, hand in hand. He wasn't perfect, and neither was Rachel. But together, they were learning how to rebuild the foundation they had almost lost, brick by brick, moment by moment. And that was the most important thing of all. The days continued to pass, and though life was not without its challenges, the atmosphere in the Diesel household began to shift in ways Vin hadn't expected. The heaviness that once seemed to cling to every room had started to lift. It wasn't instantaneous, and it certainly wasn't without its setbacks, but each day brought them closer to something resembling normalcy, and perhaps more importantly, something resembling peace. The kind of peace that wasn't just a fleeting moment, but a steady underlying presence that made everything feel more grounded. Vin had come to understand that being a father and husband wasn't just about showing up. It wasn't about providing for the family in the conventional sense, offering gifts or fulfilling duties that society expected. It was about being present, truly present, in the lives of those he loved. This wasn't something he had been taught, at least not in the way he now understood it. His own upbringing in the Bronx had taught him to be tough, to keep emotions in check, to focus on survival rather than connection. But now, as he looked at his family, he realized that the real strength lay not in avoiding vulnerability, but in embracing it. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the breakthrough moment came, though it wasn't dramatic in the way Vin might have imagined. They were all in the kitchen together, preparing a simple dinner. Ava had insisted on helping, an eager smile on her face as she tried to follow Rachel's instructions, carefully stirring the pasta sauce while Rachel chopped vegetables nearby. Vin was sitting at the table, working on some paperwork, when Rachel caught his eye and nodded toward Ava. It was one of those moments where nothing needed to be said. Vin stood up, walked over, and placed his hand gently on Ava's shoulder. "Need any help, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice warm. Ava looked up at him, her face lighting up as if she hadn't expected him to be so involved in something so simple. "Can you help with the garlic, Daddy?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. Vin smiled, taking the small garlic clove from her hands and setting to work. As he crushed the garlic and added it to the sizzling pan, he couldn't help but notice the way Ava's face glowed with pride. She was learning. She was growing. And he was there to witness it. Rachel, who had been quiet for a moment, watching them, leaned in and whispered, "I think we're really doing it, Vin. We're really making it work." Her words were soft, but there was a weight to them, a recognition of how far they had come. Vin met her gaze, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, I think we are." But the truth was, while this moment felt like a small victory, Vin knew that it wasn't the end of the road. The journey he and Rachel had embarked on, this process of rebuilding, of reconnecting, was ongoing. They would face more difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and missteps along the way. But what had changed was their willingness to face those challenges head-on, together, as a team. And that made all the difference. Ava's progress was remarkable in its own right. She had become more open, more engaged with the world around her. The quiet little girl who once kept to herself was now talking more, laughing more, asking questions, and exploring her creativity with greater enthusiasm. She had started drawing not just scenes of their family, but broader pictures of the world, wild forests, sunsets, oceans, things she had never expressed before. It was as though her spirit was awakening, and Vin couldn't help but feel proud of the resilience she had shown. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ava showed Vin a drawing she had been working on for weeks. It was a picture of their house, yes, but it was surrounded by a vibrant forest of trees, flowers, and animals. In the middle of the picture, there was a small family, Vin, Rachel, and Ava, standing in front of the house, all of them smiling. "Do you like it, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. Vin took the drawing in his hands, his heart swelling with emotion. "I love it," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. You're getting so good at this." Ava smiled and crawled into his lap, resting her head against his chest. For a moment, it was just the three of them, quiet, content, and at peace. It wasn't a perfect moment. There were still things they hadn't figured out, but in that silence, in the warmth of their togetherness, Vin realized that this was exactly what they had been fighting for. These were the moments that mattered. Rachel, who had been sitting across from them, watching the interaction with a soft smile, finally spoke up. "It's amazing how far we've come, isn't it?" Vin nodded, his gaze flicking between his wife and daughter. "Yeah, it is. I didn't think it would happen this quickly, but it's happening. Slowly, but surely." "I know," Rachel said, her voice quieter now, almost as though she was speaking to herself. "But there's still a lot we need to work through, Vin. It's not all perfect, and I'm not expecting it to be. But I believe in us. I really do." Vin leaned over and kissed her forehead, his fingers brushing the side of her face gently. "I believe in us too. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, Rachel. All the way." Her eyes glistened as she met his gaze. "And I'm here too." The weight of those words hung in the air, but this time it felt different. There was no fear in the silence between them, just a quiet understanding that they were both committed to this journey, no matter how long it took. Later that evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Vin and Rachel sat outside under the stars, a comfortable silence enveloping them. The night air was cool, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, they were able to simply be together, without the looming stress of unresolved issues hanging over them. "I know things won't always be easy," Rachel said softly, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "But we've come this far, Vin. I think we can make it through anything if we stick together." Vin took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "We will," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "We're stronger than we think. And we have each other." The years ahead would bring their own set of challenges, no doubt. There would be more moments of doubt, more obstacles to overcome. But what Vin had come to realize was that the strength of their family wasn't found in perfection. It was found in the way they supported one another, the way they showed up even when things got tough. It was in the quiet moments of understanding, the shared laughter, and the unconditional love that bound them together. As Vin sat there, looking at the woman he loved, the daughter who had begun to open her heart again, and the family they were rebuilding, he knew one thing for sure. The journey wasn't over, but they were on the right path. And that was enough to keep going.